Punishment. In today's video, we're going to talk about Timothy Jones Jr. Timothy killed his 5 children. He claims to have been hearing voices at the time. Let's get into the video. Timothy Jones met the mother of his children, Amber, while they worked together at the Chicago-based Enchanted Castle, a fun park that is similar to Chuck E. Cheese. He began to take her to his church. In 2004, they married within weeks. The church expected couples to marry right away. She was 19 and he was 22. Saw an intelligent man in Timothy, grounded in religion, who was building a life for himself. She didn't have much, and he was going places. When Jones took a liking to her, she was hooked. But Amber learned that Jones's church was strict. Women were not allowed to cut their hair. They could not wear pants, makeup, or jewelry. Jones threw himself into the faith, praying in tongues and disciplining his children with beatings, as he believed the Bible clearly instructed in the 23rd chapter of Proverbs. Such punishment was good for children, he believed, for the Bible said, "Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die." He ignored what people had been telling him for years. He shouldn't take everything in the Bible literally. The family then moved to Mississippi, where Jones eventually graduated from Mississippi State University, the first in his family to attend college and finish. He graduated summa cum laude, that's Latin for with highest honors, with a degree in computer science and engineering, all while married with children and working several jobs. His family couldn't be prouder. His dad thought he could do anything he wanted. Everything was moving in the right direction when he landed his competitive job at a computer chip maker, Intel, in Blythewood. For Amber, this was the family's chance at a better life. After living in student housing at Mississippi State, they'd be able to raise the 3 children in a bigger house. She would have the help of a nanny. Instead, Jones chose to buy a ramshackle trailer on a red bank dirt road off South Carolina 6. In addition to his full-time job, he wanted to homestead and bought 30 chickens, 3 goats, 2 turkeys, and 3 rabbits. Amber stayed at home with the animals and the children. It was an isolated area, and she didn't have a car or even know how to drive. By 2013, the couple had 2 more kids. Jones wanted Amber to homeschool the children, but she didn't have a high school diploma. Amber felt inadequate and cut off from the world. She had no family nearby, and Jones's family was in Mississippi. Alone and overwhelmed, Amber eventually had an affair with a neighbor. In 2012, when the marriage fell apart, Timothy met with a Columbia therapist, April Hams. He impressed her as a smart, loving father who wanted the best for his children. Jones didn't want Amber to be a part of the kids' lives, and he asked the therapist to write an affidavit for his divorce attorney, stating that Jones was fit to bring up the children alone. Amber had no such affidavit. She didn't even have an attorney. Jones was given primary custody as the sole financial provider, while she was granted regular visitation in their final months together. Jones knocked out her back teeth when he threw a phone at her. He headbutted her, spat on her in front of the children, and headbutted her unconscious, according to testimony. Mentally, Jones was spiraling out of control. He started using drugs and drinking again. I wonder what the church thinks about that. He was wrestling with voices in his head. He later told psychiatrists, and as time went by, Jones became increasingly angry about little things. He hired a succession of babysitters to take care of his children while he worked. Jones was distressed about his failed marriage, but he kept an immaculate home and was a dedicated, attentive, and wonderful father to his children, two of the babysitters would later say. Then he hired Crystal Ballantyne, who had just turned 17 years old and had an infant daughter. She soon became his live-in lover, accompanying him to a fundamentalist Christian church. But this relationship began to sour too. He insisted Ballantyne adopt the ways of his church, wear long dresses, grow her hair out, and be subservient to him. And she saw how he punished his children, hitting them pretty hard and making them stand tippy-toe in the corner. He believed spanking and corporal punishment was medicine for their sick bodies. The final straw was when she found him preparing to whip her infant daughter. After Ballantyne left, another babysitter, Joy Lorick, grew increasingly concerned about the mobile home's disarray. Trash and dirty clothes covered the floor, and roaches had moved in. Jones continued with his brutal punishments and formed a habit of feeding the children nothing but oatmeal all day. Once before Lorick left for the day, the children asked, "Could you not tell Daddy you just fed us? Because he might not feed us again." In August 2014, several weeks before the children were killed, Lorick called the South Carolina Department of Social Services to report the lack of food and physical abuse. Lorick didn't know that teachers at Sagatha Elementary School had already notified the agency about the physical abuse months prior, and that the agency had already required Jones to make a written promise he would never spank or beat his children again. I'm sure he learned his lesson. I'm sure it won't happen again. Until it did. But when a social services investigator went to interview the babysitter, she interviewed the wrong babysitter, according to court testimony. The children's mother, who is represented by attorney Senator Dick Harpootlian, he filed a lawsuit against social services seeking damages for the children's alleged wrongful deaths by a known abuser whose abuse went uninterrupted by social services. The deaths were entirely preventable. Her lawsuit claimed the agency has denied the allegations. During the trial, Sagatha teachers, administrators, and babysitters cry while testifying, describing Jones's children as 5 of the most wonderful, innocent, and loving children anyone could wish for. 5 beautiful treasures, as Prosecutor Hubbard put it. A timeline of events.
Spanned nearly 5 years, and in that time, a lot has happened.
Brandon Taylor is on your side tonight, giving us a look back at important dates in this case.
August 28th, 2014. This is the last time anyone saw the children alive as Timothy Ray Jones Jr. picked them up from school and daycare. September 2nd, the children's school noticed they were absent from class. September 3rd, Jones's ex-wife reported that her 5 children, ages 1 through 8, were missing. She told officers that she hadn't been able to get in contact with Jones and had also filed a missing persons report. According to neighbors who lived near Jones, he said he was moving with his kids from their Lexington home to another state. September 6th, Jones gets arrested in Raleigh, Mississippi at a driver's license checkpoint. During the arrest, officers say they noticed a smell of chemicals coming from his vehicle. They believe they were used to make meth in a synthetic form of marijuana. Officers also found what appeared to be bleach, blood, and possible body fluids in the car. Officers say they also got a hit on the missing persons report filed earlier. Between September 8th and 9th, law enforcement says Jones confessed to killing his 5 children. He also led deputies to an area in Alabama where the bodies of his kids were found in trash bags. That was 12 days after Lexington investigators believed the murders happened. The next day, then Lexington County Sheriff Lewis McCarty announced that Jones would face murder charges. We also learned the names of the children that were killed: 8-year-old Mira, 7-year-old Elias, 6-year-old Nathan, 2-year-old Gabriel, and 1-year-old Elaine Jones. September 11th, after waiving an extradition hearing, Jones traveled with deputies for 9 hours to come back to Lexington County. September 14th, a memorial for the children was held in Mississippi where Jones's parents live. September 17th, News 19 obtains arrest warrants for Jones. According to those documents, he believed the children were going to, quote, kill him, chop him, and feed him to the dog, end quote. Those warrants also state he had been treated for mental illness in the past. September 25th, Jones' lawyers request a gag order in the case. About a week later, a judge agrees and grants the order, saying the autopsy of the kids, the 911 tapes, and medical information won't be released to the public, adding that the details would stop Jones from getting a fair trial. Moving to June 2015, the defense team for Jones files new court paperwork wanting to see all of the evidence against their client. December 9th, Timothy Jones finally makes an appearance in a Lexington courtroom. This is when prosecutors announce they are seeking the death penalty. March 6, 2018, an initial trial date is set for Timothy Jones. With jury selection to begin in October of that year, the date comes nearly 3 years after the alleged murders. May 30th, we learn that Jones's lawyers plan to use an insanity defense in his trial. In October, a judge delays the trial into 2019. The move came a week before the trial was originally to begin.
Night of August 28th, Jones killed all 5 of his children. After finding his 6-year-old son dead in bed, Tim Jones Jr. made a quick trip to a convenience store to buy cigarettes. On the way back, heard the voice of a demon telling him to kill his other 4 children. He heard a demonic voice, a creepy gremlin voice that told him kill the kids. Dr. Richard Fike at his mobile home. Jones went to his 4 remaining children and strangled each of them. Mariah 8, Elias 7, Gabriel 2, and Abigail Elaine 1. According to the Joneses' confession to police, earlier that night, an angry Jones had punished his son Nathan, who was 6 years old, by making him do physical exercises to the point the child died. Jones confessed to police. Now, I know it's a common reaction that when you find your child dead in their bed, that you need to go and buy cigarettes. Jones said he believed if he went to prison for killing Nathan, the 4 remaining children would be left alone because their mother did not want them, and it was better that they died. Jones had been driving around for 9 days with the bodies of his kids. Jones eventually abandoned the bodies, each in its own garbage bag, in a vast Alabama forest about a week after the killings. Not long after, he was arrested in a routine traffic safety check in Mississippi. Chief Deputy Marty Patterson told the court, as I approached Jones's Cadillac Escalade, with the window was down, I noticed a foul odor coming from somewhere. It was the smell of decomposition. I call it the smell of death. Photos from inside the car show a large bleach stain on the carpet, as well as reddish stains and a blue bucket containing rubbish bags. Over the next 3 days, Mississippi police officer, with the help of Jones's father, Tim Jones Sr., questioned Jones and eventually got him to confess to murdering his 5 children. could someone kill their 5 children? Jones's defense attorneys argued that he is the poison fruit of a toxic family tree, rotted by severe mental illness, drug abuse, alcoholism, incest, multiple suicides, child abuse, and parental abandonment. Gripped by insane delusions and fueled by synthetic marijuana, Jones fell apart under the stress of a broken marriage and the demands of caring for 5 young children. In other words, it's everybody else's fault, it's not his fault at all. More than half a dozen mental experts assess Jones. Their findings range from insane to being mentally troubled, but faking extreme symptoms he was said to have. One court-appointed psychiatrist testified that although Jones claimed to hear voices, they were probably his own anxious thoughts, if anything. I want to explain something. How legal insanity works is just because you may have a legitimate mental illness does not automatically make you not legally responsible for your crime. It comes down to one question, and the question is, did the defendant at the time of the crime know the difference between right and wrong? That is a question of fact for a jury to decide. And the problem with it is that it is an affirmative defense. So it becomes a battle of the experts. And then the jury has to sort it out and decide who they believe and who they don't. Defense attorney Boyd Young summed up his client in these terms: killing children you love is insane. Duh. Or maybe Jones was an evil killer who plotted out the murders, made plans to burn his children's bodies, and evaded the law for more than a week. As the 11th Circuit solicitor Rick Hubbard said, Hubbard told the jury he didn't believe Jones's story that he killed little Nathan by accident by forcing the child to do extreme exercises. Instead, Hubbard said, Jones killed Nathan in a white-hot rage and ripped up his favorite Woody doll, which authorities later found in shreds. Folks, he said the bottom line is this: he knew what he was doing that night. Hubbard said, calling Jones a monster. This man knew right from wrong. He chose wrong. One of the children's babysitters testified
In Lexington County now, the jury in the Timothy Jones case heard testimony from the children's former babysitter today, who said Jones called her a few days after investigators say he killed his 5 kids.
News 19's Jacob Reynolds was in court as the woman talked about her relationship with the Jones family.
The jury in the case against Timothy Ray Jones Jr. heard from witnesses for the first time who painted a picture of what August of 2014 was like for Timothy Ray Jones and his children. Prosecutors called 2 employees from the Jones Children's School and also talked to one of his former co-workers. They also called Christina Elke, who lived next door and was often a babysitter for the 2 youngest Jones children, starting in the late summer of 2014 through August when they disappeared. Elke was emotional in court at several times as she recounted what she remembered of the children.
And that night,
He picked them up.
you saw him when you picked up baby Lane.
Yes.
What do you remember about that day, the last day?
Nothing out of the ordinary. The children were happy to see him, and he got them and left, just as always.
It was revealed in court that she was one of the only witnesses who testified Wednesday who said she heard from Jones after August 28th when police say he killed the children. She said the 2 texted about babysitting arrangements until he eventually called her saying he had left the state.
He said that he had left South Carolina, that he needed a fresh start, he and the kids, and they would not be returning. He said that he knew he owed me money and for babysitting, and that he had taken everything he needed from the home, and I was free to get whatever I needed out of the home to compensate for what he owed me.
Elke said she remembers Jones being bitter to his ex-wife, saying she felt he still missed her. She also said he was a lonely man who didn't have visitors at the home and that he was usually socially awkward. Prosecutors have asked every one of their witnesses if any of them ever heard Jones say he was afraid of the children or if they ever noticed anything about his mental competency. So far, all of their witnesses have said Jones never expressed being afraid and that they never noticed mental issues. Reporting in Lexington County, Jacob Reynolds, News 19. WLTX.
After just 1 hour of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict.
I won't wait on much longer. Ms. Miller, have y'all reached a verdict?
Yes,
Was your verdict unanimous?
yes.
All right, will you hand it to Mr. Hagan, please?
As to indictments 2015 GS 320188, 0189, 0190, 0191, 0195, we the jury find as follows. As to indictment 188, Mira, guilty. As to indictment 189, Elias, guilty. As to indictment 190, Abigail, guilty. As to indictment 191, Gabriel, guilty. As to indictment 195, Natan, guilty. And it is so signed by the foreperson this 4th day of June 2019.
The guilty phase of the trial then began, and after a brief jury deliberation, they came back with their verdict.
Versus Timothy Ray Jones, Jr. We, the jury, unanimously agree on the existence of an aggravating circumstance. 2 or more persons were murdered by the defendant by act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct in the murder of a small child under the age of 11 or younger. And it is so signed by the foreperson. We, the jury, in the above entitled case have found beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of the following statutory aggravating circumstances, to wit, 2 or more persons were murdered by the defendant by act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct, and the murder of 5 children 11 years of age or younger. Now recommend to the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones, Jr., be sentenced to death.
Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death, 5 times for each count of first-degree murder. Timothy Jones Jr. now sits on death row. Please let me know what you guys think about this case. Do you believe that he was insane at the time? I don't. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like to follow me on social media or support the channel on Patreon, visit the Crime and Punishment store, or just make a one-time donation to support the channel. All of the links are below. And thank you guys again, and I'll see you in the next video.